Welcome back to Finance Empire Real Life Stories. Before we begin today's emotional journey, I want you to think about something very real. Have you ever been so afraid of disappointing someone that you carried a secret all alone? Maybe it was a bad result, a mistake, or a moment where life didn't go the way everyone expected. Sometimes the hardest thing in life is not failure itself. It's finding the courage to tell the truth. Today's story is not just about grades or school. It is about pressure, sacrifice, dreams, and the silent weight many children carry on their shoulders every single day. If you are learning English, this story will also help you understand emotional vocabulary, family conversations, and real-life expressions used in difficult situations. So sit back, relax, and step into Matteo's world. Matteo walked beside his parents toward the school building, feeling nervous but strangely lighter than the day before. The cold morning air brushed against his face, while his father held a folded piece of paper in his rough mechanic's hands. It was the same exam that had nearly destroyed Matteo's confidence the previous night. As they entered the school hallway, Matteo noticed the colourful student artwork hanging on the walls. Normally he would avoid looking at anything related to school, but today felt different. His secret was no longer trapped inside him. The fear that had lived in his chest for weeks was finally beginning to loosen its grip. His mother adjusted her scarf nervously while reading the English phrases she had written in her notebook late last night. She had practiced them over and over because she wanted the teacher to understand that they cared deeply about Matteo's education. Matteo suddenly realised how much effort his parents put into every tiny detail of his life. When they entered the classroom, Matteo's math teacher, Mr. Reynolds, greeted them warmly. Matteo expected anger or disappointment, but instead the teacher looked concerned. "I'm glad you all came," Mr. Reynolds said gently. "Matteo is a hardworking student. The problem isn't laziness." Those words shocked Matteo. He had spent weeks believing he was simply a failure. The teacher opened a folder and spread several assignments across the desk. "Your son understands concepts slowly but deeply," he explained. "He gets overwhelmed during fast lessons and timed exams." Matteo lowered his eyes. Hearing someone explain his struggle out loud felt painful and comforting at the same time. His father leaned forward. "So what can we do?" he asked quietly. That question changed everything. For the next hour, the conversation was no longer about blame. It became a conversation about solutions. Mr. Reynolds suggested after-school tutoring twice a week and recommended online practice lessons Matteo could complete at home without pressure. Matteo listened carefully as his parents nodded with determination. For the first time, he understood something important. They were not angry because he had failed a test. They were afraid because they thought he was suffering alone. As they left the school building, his father placed a heavy hand on Matteo's shoulder. "You don't carry this alone anymore," he said. Those simple words felt more valuable than any grade Matteo had ever received. The weeks that followed were not easy. Matteo still struggled with equations and formulas. Some nights he became frustrated and wanted to slam his textbook shut forever. But something inside the house had changed. The silence was gone. Instead of hiding in his room pretending everything was fine, Matteo began asking questions openly. His father sat beside him after work, still smelling like motor oil, trying his best to understand the lessons. His mother brought tea and snacks while practicing English vocabulary alongside him. Slowly, their tiny apartment transformed from a place of pressure into a place of teamwork. One rainy evening, Matteo became stuck on a difficult algebra problem. He rubbed his forehead in frustration. "I'll never understand this," he muttered. His father looked at the page for a long moment before laughing softly. "Matteo, do you think I learned engines in one day?" he asked. Matteo looked up. "The first time I opened a car hood, I thought I was looking at a machine from another planet," his father continued. "But every mistake taught me something. That's how learning works." Matteo smiled weakly. His father's advice wasn't perfect textbook wisdom, but it was real. It came from experience, sacrifice, and survival. At school, Matteo also began to change. Instead of sitting silently in class pretending to understand everything, he slowly started raising his hand. The first time he admitted confusion during math class, his face burned with embarrassment. But something surprising happened. 3 other students admitted they were confused too. Matteo realized that many people hide their struggles because they are afraid of looking weak. But honesty often gives others permission to be honest as well. Over time, Matteo stopped seeing himself as the failing student. He began seeing himself as someone still learning. One afternoon after tutoring, he stayed behind to organise papers while Mr. Reynolds packed his briefcase. "You know," the teacher said thoughtfully, "the students who struggle sometimes become the strongest learners later in life." Matteo frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because they learn resilience," the teacher replied. "Easy success teaches confidence. Difficult moments teach character." That sentence stayed with Matteo for weeks. Meanwhile, his parents were learning lessons of their own. His mother began taking fewer overtime shifts at the grocery store so she could spend evenings at home. His father stopped talking about perfection and started asking Matteo simpler questions instead. "Are you okay? Did you learn something today? Do you need help?" The pressure inside the apartment slowly melted into support. One Saturday morning, Matteo found his father sitting quietly beside the kitchen window, holding the old college savings jar. The jar was only half full. His father turned it slowly in his hands and sighed. "For years," he said softly, "I thought this jar was the most important thing we could give you." Matteo sat down beside him. "But now I think maybe peace of mind matters too." Matteo looked at his father carefully. He had never seen him speak so openly before. In their family, emotions were usually buried beneath long work hours and tired smiles. His father chuckled quietly. "You know, when we moved here, I believed success meant never failing." He paused before continuing. "But maybe real success is learning how to stand back up after failure." Those words settled deeply into Matteo's heart. Months passed, and little by little Matteo improved. His grades were not perfect, but they became steady. More importantly, he no longer felt terrified every time a teacher handed back an exam. One afternoon, Mr. Reynolds returned another math test to the class. Matteo stared at the paper nervously before flipping it over. A large B- was written across the top. It was not extraordinary. It was not perfect. But to Matteo it felt like sunlight after a storm. He smiled quietly to himself while the teacher walked past his desk. "See?" Mr. Reynolds whispered. "Progress." That evening, Matteo walked home with a completely different feeling from the one he carried months earlier. The streets looked warmer somehow. The sunset felt softer. Even the old apartment building no longer seemed heavy with expectations. When he entered the apartment, his mother immediately noticed the paper in his hand. "What happened?" she asked nervously. Matteo handed her the exam slowly. She stared at it for a second before breaking into a huge smile. His father looked over from the kitchen table and laughed proudly. "Look at that," he said. "Our boy is fighting back." They celebrated with homemade soup and cheap bakery desserts from the corner store. It wasn't a grand celebration, but Matteo realized something beautiful that night. The happiest moments in life are not always about perfection. Sometimes they are about growth. As the months continued, Matteo became more confident not only in math but in himself. He joined a small study group at school and even helped another student who struggled with homework. One evening, that student admitted quietly, "I thought I was stupid." Matteo immediately shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "Struggling doesn't make you stupid. Giving up makes things harder." As he spoke those words, Matteo realized he was repeating the same encouragement his family had given him. Pain had turned into wisdom. By the end of the school year, Matteo stood outside the classroom holding his final report card. His hand still trembled slightly, but not from fear this time. He had passed every subject. When he arrived home, his parents hugged him tightly, but the real victory was not the grades themselves. The real victory was the honesty, trust, and understanding they had rebuilt together. That night, Matteo looked around the small apartment differently. The old refrigerator still hummed loudly. The paint on the walls was still chipped. The college savings jar was still only half full, but the house no longer felt burdened by silent expectations. It felt full of hope, and maybe that was worth even more. Before we end today's story, remember this: everyone carries invisible pressure. Some people carry family expectations. Others carry fear, guilt, or the weight of trying not to disappoint the people they love. But hiding your struggles only makes them heavier. Matteo learned that courage is not about never failing. Courage is about telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. And sometimes the people you fear disappointing the most are the very people who will help you stand again. Thank you so much for joining today's emotional journey here on Finance Empire, Real Life Stories. I hope this story helped you improve your English listening skills while also reminding you that mistakes are not the end of your story. They are often the beginning of growth. In our next story, we will follow a young woman who lands her dream corporate job, only to discover that success can sometimes cost more than money. She will have to choose between protecting her career and protecting her integrity. Trust me, you do not want to miss that powerful lesson. Until next time, keep practicing your English, keep believing in yourself, and remember this one important truth. Your value is never measured by a single grade, a single mistake, or a single bad moment. Goodbye. Before we continue Matteo's journey, I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine carrying a backpack so heavy that even when you put it down at night, the weight still stays inside your chest. That is what pressure feels like for millions of students around the world. Some are afraid of failure, some are afraid of disappointing their families, and some are simply exhausted from trying to be perfect all the time. Today's continuation is not just about school. It is about rebuilding confidence after failure and discovering that your worth as a person is far greater than a number written in red ink. A few weeks after Matteo passed his exams, life inside the apartment slowly returned to normal. The atmosphere felt lighter. His mother hummed softly while cooking dinner again, and his father no longer looked at Matteo with constant worry in his tired eyes. But deep inside Matteo, a small fear still remained. Every time the teacher announced a surprise quiz or handed out assignments, Matteo's stomach tightened. He worried that one bad result could pull him back into the same darkness he had escaped before. One afternoon during class, Mr. Reynolds wrote a long equation across the board and asked the students to solve it independently. Matteo stared at the numbers, while the classroom filled with the scratching sound of pencils moving quickly across paper. His chest tightened again. Around him, students flipped pages confidently, while he remained frozen. The old voice returned to his mind. "You are too slow. You will fail again. You are disappointing everyone." Matteo gripped his pencil tightly, trying to silence the panic building inside him. Then he remembered something his father had said during one of their late-night study sessions. Fear grows louder when you face it alone. Slowly, Matteo raised his hand. Mr. Reynolds walked over calmly. "What's wrong?" "I don't know where to begin," Matteo admitted quietly. The teacher smiled gently and pointed toward the first step of the equation. "Then begin there," he said. That simple answer changed Matteo's perspective completely. He realized that most difficult situations in life feel impossible because people stare at the entire mountain instead of taking one small step forward. From that day on, Matteo stopped demanding perfection from himself. Instead, he focused on progress. Every evening he studied one chapter at a time. When he became confused, he asked questions instead of hiding his struggles. Little by little, his confidence started growing stronger. At home, his parents also began changing their routines. Instead of constantly discussing work, bills, and future success, they started spending more time together as a family. One Friday evening, Matteo's mother surprised them by turning off the television and bringing out an old board game from a dusty kitchen cabinet. His father laughed in disbelief. "I haven't played this in years." For the next 2 hours, the apartment echoed with laughter instead of silence. Matteo realized something important during that evening. His family had spent so many years surviving that they had forgotten how to simply enjoy each other's company. Later that night, Matteo sat beside the kitchen window, watching rain slide slowly down the glass. His mother joined him quietly. "You know," she said softly, "when we first moved here, I thought success meant giving you everything we never had." Matteo listened carefully. "But I forgot something," she continued. "Children do not only need opportunities, they also need peace." Those words stayed in Matteo's mind long after she went to bed. At school, Matteo slowly became more comfortable with who he was. He stopped comparing himself to the smartest students in class and began focusing on his own growth instead. One day during lunch, a classmate named Daniel sat beside him looking frustrated. "I studied all night and still failed my chemistry quiz," Daniel groaned. Normally, Matteo would have stayed quiet, but this time he spoke honestly. "I failed math badly a few months ago," he admitted. Daniel looked shocked. "Seriously, but you seem so calm all the time." Matteo laughed softly. "Trust me, I wasn't calm." For the next 20 minutes, they talked openly about stress, fear, and the pressure students feel to succeed. Matteo realized that almost everyone around him was carrying invisible struggles. Some hid them behind confidence, others hid them behind jokes, and some buried them so deeply that nobody noticed at all. That conversation gave Matteo a strange sense of strength. He was no longer just surviving his own problems. He was beginning to understand other people's pain too. As the school year continued, Matteo developed a new habit. Every Sunday night, he wrote short notes inside a small notebook beside his bed. Sometimes he wrote about things he learned. Sometimes he wrote about mistakes. And sometimes he simply wrote reminders to himself. Failure is temporary. Ask for help. You are more than your grades. The notebook became his quiet source of comfort during difficult moments. One cold winter morning, Matteo arrived at school early and noticed Mr. Reynolds sitting alone at his desk grading papers. "You're here early," the teacher said with a smile. Matteo shrugged. Couldn't sleep. Mr. Reynolds studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You know, Matteo, when I was your age, I failed an important science exam." Matteo blinked in surprise. "Really?" The teacher nodded. "I thought my future was over." "What happened?" Mr. Reynolds smiled thoughtfully. "I learned that one bad moment doesn't decide your entire life." That sentence hit Matteo deeply because for so long he had believed the opposite. Before leaving, the teacher handed Matteo his latest assignment. At the top of the page was written, "Excellent improvement. Keep trusting yourself." Matteo stared at those words during the entire walk home. For the first time in a long while, he felt proud of himself not because he was perfect, but because he refused to quit. That evening, his father came home exhausted from work, his hands stained with grease and dirt. Matteo noticed the deep fatigue in his eyes. "Long day?" Matteo asked. His father sighed heavily before sitting at the kitchen table. "Very long." Without saying another word, Matteo quietly brought him a glass of water and began helping prepare dinner. His father watched silently for a moment before smiling. "You're growing up," he said. Matteo realized something then. His parents had spent years sacrificing themselves for his future, but now he wanted to support them too, even in small ways. The relationship inside the apartment no longer felt one-sided. It felt balanced, honest and real. Months later, during the final parent-teacher meeting of the year, Mr. Reynolds spoke warmly to Matteo's parents. "Your son has improved academically," he said, "but more importantly, he has become resilient." Matteo's father frowned slightly. "Resilient?" "It means he keeps moving forward even after difficulty," the teacher explained. His mother smiled proudly, while Matteo looked down shyly. On the walk home, his father repeated the word quietly. "Resilient," he said again with admiration. "I like that word." Matteo smiled. When they reached their apartment building, the sunset painted the sky orange and gold above the city. Matteo paused for a moment before entering the building. Just a few months earlier, he had stood outside the same entrance, feeling terrified to face his family. He remembered the crushing guilt, the fear, and the loneliness that nearly consumed him. But now things were different. The fear no longer controlled him. He had learned that honesty creates connection, while silence creates distance. He had learned that failure is painful, but hiding from it is even more painful. Most importantly, he learned that love does not disappear when mistakes happen. That night, Matteo opened his notebook once again before sleeping. He wrote slowly and carefully across the page. "Sometimes the people who struggle the most become the strongest because they learn how to rise again." He stared at the sentence for a long moment before closing the notebook gently. Outside the window, the city lights flickered softly in the darkness, while the small apartment filled with quiet peace. And for the first time in a very long time, Matteo truly believed that his future was still waiting for him. Thank you for continuing Matteo's emotional journey here on Finance Empire Real Life Stories. I hope this story reminded you that life is not about being perfect every single day. It is about continuing forward even after difficult moments. In our next powerful story, we will follow a young employee who discovers a shocking secret inside his company. A secret that could either make him rich or destroy his conscience forever. Will he stay silent or risk everything to do what is right? Stay tuned. Keep improving your English. And remember this: your mistakes may shape your story, but they never define your value.